This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Mijan?
Yes. All right. Thank you, Professor Harley, for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here together again. I finished my dissertation on Zoom, and here I'm on Zoom again, at Zoom homecoming. So just to provide the work that I am doing as an alum, as an assistant professor here at California State University, Los Angeles. I would provide some institutional background here. We serve like more than 24,000 students, and 73% of them identify as Hispanic, and more than 90% of the students also are categorized as historically underrepresented minorities. So adding to that, our students are majority first-generation students, Pell-eligible students, and many of our students work actually full-time or part-time. So we are in a context where actually we have wonderful opportunities to build on those kind of student demographics to advance these DEI initiatives. And I do so in my current institutional context in two ways. One is I'm an applied linguist, so I use the linguistic justice framework in all my scholarship and in all my classes. So given that most of our students are coming from bilingual, multilingual households, the linguistic justice framework really resonates well with their life experiences. We know that every immigrant family in the US loses their home language by the third generation. So I use my classroom spaces to work on that, to make the students aware of all these things that are happening. So we have nice conversation in all classes that I teach about how to stem this tide, how to stop this decline, or how to respect and make our home languages thrive. But my key contribution has been so far is in the first year writing program. So we have multiple first year writing classes, as like ISU has. So one class that we worked on is English 1010 accelerated college writing classes. So because of the student demographics that I have just described, I see not really because it's the historical reasons that actually make this happen. So we have noticed that in our first year writing classes, a significant portion of students fail to complete the classes. They fail the class for a variety of reasons. So our students need to have like 70% to get a credit for the first year writing class. So if they get a D grade or an F grade, if they withdraw, so that's a failure in a sense. So the project that we worked on is like for that class, almost 29 or 30% students failed in every iteration of the class. It kind of got worse because of the pandemic as well. But we actually looked at the historical data for that particular class. We found out that our male students fail more than female students. Like traditionally speaking, female students have been the underserved, underprivileged, right? But in a minority institutional context, the changes, we see some changes in the dynamics. So we have more male students failing than female students. We have more underrepresented minority students failing than the non-URM students. We have more first-generation students failing. We have more Pell-eligible students failing. We have more Hispanic students failing than, say, white students in our institutional context in here. So what we did, we joined the initiatives by the Department of Education, university, for a Hispanic majority Hispanic serving institution initiative here to enhance the educational outcomes of the students. So we collaborated with our lecturers and also some of the tenure line faculty to make a team to critically redesign our class so that we create environments in which students who have been unsuccessful in all these classes actually can pass without sacrificing the educational quality or even the faculty well-being. So we redesigned this class in the last 2 years, actually. And then I was one of those instructors who kind of piloted this class. And in my first semester of piloting, we saw significant changes. So it's like everything changed directions. So we defined equity in our own ways and practiced it in our individual classrooms. We developed some common assignments, and all these things actually made a change. I can give more details on that if possibly in a different way. But the thing that happened for me is that I changed, like the pass or failure rate changed in all categories except for the male one. So I previously did not realize that a kind of gap in my work. So I see that in my classes, Hispanic male students are still failing more. So as we continue these kind of equity conversations across the kind of university among all the faculty in the department, like personally, I identified that as an area for further work as I advance this equity initiative. So overall, we were able to have a conversation about this equity-focused writing instruction across the board. So a lot of our faculty joined, and like in the last year, our DFW rate, we say DFW, drop, withdrawal, fail, came down to 23% from the 30% mark. So it's a significant achievement for us as a writing program here, and we would like to continue that initiative. And we have talked about these initiatives at 4C, at some other institutions. This seems is a thing that a lot of people are actually interested in talking about. And I think I'll stop here. I'll be happy to answer any questions specific to that later.
Thank you so much, Mijan. Flo, I will turn it over to you. Flo, you're muted.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me here. I do appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to kind of share some of what I am doing. I will start by saying again, thank you. I will say that my journey or my trajectory, and then starting from at Illinois State, I spent quite a bit of time working and doing work and looking at equity and inclusion with the creation of with Umoja and the continuation of that, and then having that to fold into some people would say the multicultural center that is now there at Illinois State because of the work and a lot of the work that the students and student activists participated in. And I'm sure Cristina is there and was there at the time when we were doing that work. That didn't stop for me as far as one, making visible the issues of equity and inclusion, or equity and diversity and inclusion, even the campus I am currently serving. I know in the bio it said that I am definitely looking at identity and AI, but I also serve as the writing coordinator for the English department. So I have a hand in working with that. I'm also serving as, let me go back, it's so many things. I'm serving as the, the chair of the Faculty Senate's nomination committee, the chair of the General Education Written Communications Committee. I'm also on the Provost's Realignment and Restructuring Committee, and serving in that capacity so that I can affect some change in those areas in which I touch. One of the things that I have also embarked on is working with Dr. Harper at North Carolina A&T University here in North Carolina, in Greensboro, and trying to connect with other HBCUs, because what we want to do is we want to bring about more awareness of Black technical and professional communications within the field. So I'm working with them in order to try to make visible the need. I see technical communications as an area where you can do that social justice work. You can do that equity, look at equity and inclusion in a way that can make social change and definitely change institutions by making apparent the ways in which institutions need change. And again, it's I'm not quiet about some of the things that I push on campus, because I believe that we have to make sure those things that equity and inclusion is a part of our curriculum. So my effort has been to be a part of the discussion. I am at a historically Black university, and that is something I'm very proud of. We have the opportunity, and I would say that we are more diverse than most campuses. Our diversity work is in working with the community at large. We do make it a part of our curriculum, but we don't just stop with the curriculum. And I do encourage my colleagues to make apparent some issues that we have dealing with religion, dealing with politics, dealing with, especially right now with the political landscape. And so we talk about those things, we write about those things, we analyze those things, and we try not to shy away from those things. And so I'll just leave that there. I will say I am very proud to also be a part of the upcoming handbook that co-editors Natasha Jones, Laura Gonzalez, Angela, and Miriam. I'm very proud to be a part of that. And so again, just making apparent those ways in which we can work for a more equitable and a more diverse and a more just field.
Thank you so much, Flo. Cristina?
Hello, everybody. I do have a little statement written, as I'm going to put it in the chat in case anybody wants to follow along for access purposes. So thank you for having me here. When I received Dr. Versosa's email about this session, I was immediately taken back to the first meeting of the DEI committee at ISU with Dr. Paula Ressler and Dr. Versosa Hurley. At that time, I was an international student, and I had been appointed as the grad representative in the committee because of my interest in social justice in English language teaching. And throughout those years, I was supported as I experienced a lot of unlearning and relearning that has hugely defined the work that I continue to do. I'm grateful for those opportunities, and I had to practice non-traditional ways of doing and being and experiment pedagogically, which was super important. Such opportunities were essential in my journey, and together with the care and support that I found in the department, that fueled my work and planted a seed for me to think about how to mobilize DEI in the work that I continue doing. So thank you. And for me, it all starts with a seemingly simple question or questions like, what is language? And what does our understanding of language reveal about the world and its inequalities? Why do more complex understandings of language matter to build more just societies? And I say seemingly simple, but doing this work is like riding the waves of language, as Joy Harjo explains in the introduction to her website, Living Nations, Living Words. Riding the waves of language means questioning how we exist in relation to one another, communities, place, the more than human world, and material life around us. For example, I currently live and work in a land where Lushootseed, the language of the Coast Salish people in Seattle, and other languages are all entangled in unequal relationships with the dominant English. I draw in my work from translingualism, as you all know, as an orientation to language with roots in the global South, which is also very important and intentional. Translingualism destabilizes the core beliefs of what counts as language and how language is performed against structuralist notions that give shape to monolingual ideologies and unequal systems of language. This perspective allows me to see the ways in which unequal Englishes and language practice come to matter or not. And then we can act on such material realities to mitigate them, and by doing and undoing, change the systems around us. In my recent work with communities, with multilingual communities, and my colleague Taiko Aoki Marcial, we have built on translingualism to focus on collective and relational knowledge making on translationships. And it's on our website, translationships.net, as translational relationships across cultures, languages, regions, boundaries, disciplines, and worldviews. Translationships move us away from individualized knowledges that have tended to value mastery and independence, and instead foreground relational networks as sites of knowledge and possibility. Translationships become possible through storying that simultaneously build new words, new worlds, which many are already doing. This idea of imagining and practicing alternative spaces and possibilities for those positioned in the margins is central to all my DI work, which is scholarship, teaching, service, all of it intertwined. Storytelling that intentionally engages with the material world to change it also allows me to unlearn, relearn by recognizing knowledges that were present but disguised in the sea of positivist theories that I had been socialized into before. So I have become a story supporter in continuing to make space for the story that communities, students, colleagues create and or imagine for themselves, listening and engaging with these situated forms of knowledge making and resistance to dominant ways of being and doing in academia. Take, for example, the admissions process for an English language teaching program, where most applicants are so-called non-native English speakers from different parts of the world. These students with unequal Englishes have different forms of access to the testing options that are required to prove language proficiency and thus necessary for admissions into the program, which are contingent on speaking scores. There may be students from a place where the closest testing option is, besides being extremely expensive, hours away and only done twice a year. So how are these students' score not going to be affected by the location, access, resources, and possibilities for practicing the language expected in the tests? The story that comes up when reading all the application files is one that marks those who don't meet the requirements as racialized multilingual students against the white listening and speaking subject. So the story tells us to change the material discursive structure around admissions in ways that account for these inequalities and the ways in which we think about how to support and build on the experiences of such students when they come to our programs. So stories like this one show us what DEI work is like for me. It's work that focuses on noticing the cracks in the systems and how we can build translationships around situated, evolving, incomplete, yet expansive knowledges. In sum, the AI work is, in my experience, about staying engaged in unsettled questions to unsettle inequitable conditions.
Thank you, Cristina. And then last but not least, Sarah.
Hi, I'm going to also read, and I wasn't as thoughtful as Cristina to have a link prepared, but if somebody wants it, let me know. Okay, before I share my perspective, I'd like to first thank the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for putting together such an important and impactful panel. It seems important also to point out how critical these diverse, localized, and contextual perspectives to doing this work are. Basically, that regardless of our shared history in terms of graduating from this particular institution and department, the unique positions we have found ourselves in allow us to carry forth the lessons learned as graduates of ISU's Department of English in distinctly different but no less meaningful ways. That said, the question was, how am I doing this work, right? So I'm going to talk some just basics. First, I teach in socially just ways, which means I'm always already thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of best serving students. I work at a Hispanic serving institution, over 90% Hispanic students in Deep South Texas on the US-Mexican border. The students at my universities, as Flo said, the diversity isn't necessarily about ethnicity, but it can rather be in terms of extreme differences in socioeconomic status, language differences, access to technology, resources, citizenship status, among other things. So if I'm invested in DEI work as a teacher, I have to pay attention to that diversity and do what I can to fill the gaps. As a wise ISU mentor pointed out when I was a graduate student here, equality is not the same as equity. So just because all the students are in my classroom doesn't mean they all have the same tools or background or resources to succeed. So that's just some basic stuff about like really easy, right? What it looks like in practice is just recognizing when students don't have internet access or have never been taught, how to use editing features of Word and doing work to address that, But I also think it's an attitude. When committed to all of my students' success. So if someone needs time for an extra time for an assignment, fine. Not having strict attendance policies, ultimately recognizing that students live complicated lives and I can either be a source of support or a hindrance to their success. In terms of research, I won't spend much time here. My research is, I think, easily accessible and highlights my ongoing commitments to social justice and furthering DEI. What I do want to talk about a little bit more, though, is my institutional service work. I make it a priority to serve on committees that, let's be fair, aren't always the easiest or most enjoyable, but also might, in the end, be more impactful for my colleagues and students' lives. I've worked on committees to revise student learning outcomes and degree assessment plans, chaired a committee tasked with revising the tenure, promotion, and review guidelines for the department, chaired various search committees tasked with identifying the best new hires for our department. I've also given my time and attention to developing courses or redesigning degree plans with meaningful impacts in mind for students. Throughout those experiences, I've sought to use my position and privilege to serve as an advocate for students and colleagues, to modify policies to make them more equitable and inclusive, to embed diversity and equity language where possible, and to always encourage attention to issues of equity and justice. In terms of community, I focused my volunteer efforts primarily on directly impacting lives where I can. So for example, I volunteered time in my professional expertise to work with asylum seekers to craft resumes. And I've also worked with a group who organizes basic need items like toothpaste, shampoo, shoelaces, stuff like that for newly arrived migrants. Ultimately, I think one approach I have to focusing on DEI work is always to be asking the questions. Where are the diversity, equity, inclusion gaps and issues? What can I do to bring attention to those or to directly intervene? I also always have to ask myself where I am part of the problem and how I might instead be part of the solution. So again, thank you for having me here. I'm eager to contribute in whatever way I can to this panel.
Thank you so much, all of you. So a few of you have mentioned the current political climate that we're living in right now, which is very polarized. And, some institutions and areas in the US have had to actually remove the words equity, diversity, inclusion from all of their institutional kind of like documents, policies, curricula, that kind of thing. So thinking about the specific context of ISU, so as Sarah mentioned, for example, you all are ISU graduates, and then you are at new contexts with different kinds of issues that you're facing. So thinking about the context of ISU as a PWI in the Midwest, how has your understanding of EDI changed, I guess, in your new context? Because I imagine that what the issues that you faced as a student here and that you saw here are very different, right, from those same equity, diversity, inclusion issues at your new institutions. So how have you had to change or adapt to those new EDI contexts. What are they, right, in your specific institution? So for example, at an HBCU or at a Hispanic serving university, what challenges like have you faced? So it's kind of a multi-part question that any of you all are welcome to speak to. So we have a lot of current graduate students here too that are probably, you know, eager to learn about this stuff as they kind of move on to the later stages of their graduate work and starting their job search. So I think this could be helpful for them to think about and hear about.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know at ISU, like my understanding was most of our students come from the suburb of Chicago, and that's a predominantly white institution. And when I went to classes, I never had to bother about whether my students, why my students are not showing up in my classes. Most of them show up in classes. So my understanding was like, okay, in the USA, I'm an international student, so my experience kind of continued to be, I had to differ or change my expectations and understanding with all these kind of things. So I thought, okay, in the USA, students all are full-time students, you know, so that's their job. They wake up, they are the full-time student, they go to bed, they're the student. At Cal State LA, well, we have a totally different scene. At the beginning of the day, that person is not really, like being a student is often not the first thing that comes to their mind. They have a full-time job often. They have caregiving responsibilities. They have like a lot of things that we do not generally associate with student duties in the ISU context. So for me, the change involved is like becoming open-ended to the life experiences of these people. I know I don't identify as Hispanic. I come from Bangladesh, so I have a different historical background. But because of my background, I kind of share some of the life experiences that my students go through. So it made me kind of ready in a sense, but because I went through the coursework in the graduate program, it allowed me kind of a toolkit. You know, all the classes that I attended had, like, all the linguistics and TESOL courses had kind of linguistic justice framework in some way or other. And then even in tech writing classes, Dr. Haas taught us how to teach tech writing in a socially just way. So even in that context, so and I did the English Studies Pedagogy class with Professor Ricardo Cruz, where we talked about teaching for diversity and social justice, where we actually unpacked each identity categories that are generally privileged in the diversity discourses. So I found actually surprisingly linguistic diversity missing in the textbook that I used for that class, but because of my other classes, that kind of created an opportunity for me to have a conversation. So I use this this theoretical framework, the theoretical understandings, and also the newfound reality in my institutional context, and compared it with my own life experiences. And then from there, I moved on, and I thought, okay, this is not how things are gonna go. So I asked my colleagues here, okay, how much reading am I supposed to assign to the students for the undergrad class, for the graduate class? Because you cannot just assign a lot of pages; they will not read. So the entire project is gonna be a failure if we don't take all these life circumstances into account, right? So I had to kind of pivot away from certain expectations that I kind of gained as a student, that, okay, I assigned the work, I have to do the work by the due date, there is no excuse. Like, that's my philosophy. That's what I learned kind of in all my classes, because I was always on task for everything. But maybe I was privileged enough to be able to do that. A lot of students in my current context do not have that privilege. So it is just being open-ended to on alternative lifestyles or life circumstances actually can prepare us to face whatever situations that come in. I know Sarah talked about how in a minority serving institution, the diversity is not necessarily about ethnicity, right? It is about finding out further categories of difference within that institutional context that actually could make a very big difference. Because as I said, in my part of the statement is that, okay, my male Hispanic students are failing more than the female ones. So that's a variation I see in my institutional context. I have to take that into account. So yeah, that's my thought on that initial question. Thank you. That's a very an important question to ask.
Thanks, Mijan. Any other perspectives? So just as a reminder, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I would just say that I think the things that Mijan said are very important, right? The context and the cultures and the regions you teach in are going to shape so much of the work that I'm saying this to the graduate students who are in this room, right? Going to shape so much of what kinds of work is needed, right? And how you address it, right? Like, so one thing that I couldn't have known before I lived in this area was there are whole areas down where I live where the infrastructure is terrible. And so if it rains, people lose internet. And so even if you're teaching an online class, you can't penalize students for not showing up because they can't control the weather, right? Like, so that's just an example of like, you have to like pay attention to your students and learn the context that you're working within to even, I think, start to know how to go about doing the most important work.
Thank you, Sarah.
Uh,
Well, go ahead.
Okay. What I'll say is this is going from ISU to DePaul and now to Winston-Salem State. One of the lessons that I've learned, and it's not so much about it is about the curriculum and it's about the students, but it's also about myself and learning more about self-care and being able to, one, understand how I need to engage with my students differently. I will say this, when I was at ISU, I was very tired because there's a lot of work to do. And there were a lot of issues, and let's just be clear, there were. And so, and even you're talking about the political climate, I was unfortunate to be at DePaul when 45 took office, and I'll just say that, and having to organize a healing summit for people at Illinois State to help them deal with the interaction with family and things of that sort as they were grieving. And just having to really understanding how I interact and deal and serve people and serve myself. And so it's become more of a where I know that I am engaging in the work, but it's in a different way. It's in a way where it feels as if I'm able to kind of breathe a little bit, but I'm engaging in it's still hard, but I am looking at, yes, it's difficult for them to sometimes to access the internet. I am definitely in the South, and when it snows, everything shuts down. Okay, but that's not just difficult for them, that's difficult for me. And so it's like engaging in a way where I exercise more care or attempting to exercise more care, and it's all right. And so I think for me, a part of the work is also understanding the labor, and that knowing that it's labor intensive, but finding ways in which you find the joy in it, and not just the the bothersome parts. I am, even at ISU, I loved when I would have students who would come and sit in my office, even though they were talking about some things where they were dealing with issues. I enjoyed that interaction, and I enjoy it now, where I've put in space in my office where they can sit down and talk and have those difficult conversations. And I think what we do is we create spaces where they can talk and have those difficult conversations. And even in our mentorship, it's not just talking about the subject matter, but it's also talking about the heart, talking about again, self-care, talking to students who are going into teaching or who are going into education, and saying, be gentle with yourself. And I think that's what Angela was trying to tell me, and Doc and everyone else was trying to tell me when I was there, be gentle with yourself. Well, it's taken some time to learn that. So if I could talk to the graduate students, I would just say, be gentle with yourself now. Do the work, find joy in the work, but also know that your labor part of that labor has to be a part of uh, I can't say balance, but because I don't know if does that exist? Does balance exist? But a part of that is finding space for yourself, finding space for joy. It's not all about just the work, but the work is not, it's not separate from who you are, is it? Is it really separate from who you are? So it's the work. It's your life. It's so much more. I gained a lot from ISU and from DePaul and from Winston-Salem State, and I'm grateful for it.
Can I add something really quick to that? Because it was just resonating so much with what Flo was saying about sustaining yourselves, right? And how your identities also will be taken up so differently depending on, where you are, like Sarah was saying as well. I think that she talked about identifying where I'm being the problem too, right? And so I just wanted to give an example. In my case, for example, my Spanish signals very different things depending on what communities exist around me, right? So going from ISU to rural Pennsylvania to a big city like Seattle, there's so many layers around this Spanish part of my identity that I need to think about where I'm being the problem at as well. So for example, making sure that that part of my identity doesn't within the dominant English speaking context, that my Spanish doesn't signal another form of oppression too, along with the let's engage with the communities and so on. So I just wanted to point that out to support what Flo was saying earlier.
I think you two have made some really great points, especially with the like in regard to like self-care, as Flo was saying, and then Cristina is what you were saying, and Sarah too, right? Like how we might be complicit in different systems of power. And I think that's especially important in thinking about and doing DEI work, especially when we know that folks committed to that work are always the ones that are tapped over and over again to do more of that work. And so there's where that self-care comes in, as Flo was saying, right? And that we also know too, and the research shows it, that this kind of work is done primarily by bodies of people of color, like it is. Within departments, within colleges, within institutions. That's just how it goes. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to strategies that you've taken maybe to help you and your institutions kind of sustain yourself while staying committed to EDI work in ways that doesn't just totally deplete you or leave you horribly overworked. Does that make sense? Mijan?
Yeah, thank you. This is an issue, and it connects with some of the questions being asked in the chat. After my the completion of the pilot project, I presented the work in the department meeting, and I also explained what exactly I did in order to reach out to the students on top of the regular class meeting. And one of my colleagues immediately identified the problem with it, saying, I know that's valuable work, but that requires a lot of time commitment, which I don't have. So what we need institutionally is reassign time, like release from courses in order to do this kind of activities more meaningfully. I mean, you can pay the faculty for doing some work, but that's not as useful as, say, having entire course release so that you can do this kind of, in my context, equity work. And it is a challenge. And I mean, I reflected in each week of my class, like at that time, when it was like 12th or 13th semester, when I was still reaching out to students, I feel like, why am I doing this? I'm on the tenure track job. I don't have to do all these kind of things. And sometimes it tests my actually patience in some sense, right? So I have this understanding that I can do only so much. When I'm talking about equity work, equity is not an individual teacher problem. It is a social structural problem. So part of my outcomes from my research on this was, it is a structural institutional problem. It will require institutional approach to it. It will require collaboration among community partners, among different campus partners, different resources that we have. So as an instructor, I'm just a piece of the bigger puzzle in here. So I can do on that end. And if I don't succeed, I don't necessarily blame myself because, well, I'm just one of the actors in this overall scene. So we need to understand the limits of this kind of work. And if the institution itself is not really helpful, like if they're taking away the term DEI because it is making resources available to a subset of population, that's really a difficult thing to do. Fortunately, in my institutional context, that is not the case. So it's like, yeah, we are aggressively advancing this DEI agenda in the sense that we want all the people that come to our scene, participate in our classroom space. We want all of them to be successful. So it has been easier on that side. But yeah, the course release thing, I think that's really a big jump to make. And we have talked about it, but I don't think that's going to happen because, in the writing program, most of the instructors are contingent faculty. So lecturers who, they have some sort of regularity in our system in here, but still it is not as people on the tenure line at all. So that's my thought on that. Thank you.
I would love to say that again, it's like you balance, again, going back to that. But what I've learned, especially since I've been on the realignment, the provost's realignment committee, this whole thing, sometimes you have to look at budgets. And institutions have budget constraints. And we're going through a whole process now where we are, how do you say, FRIP? Well, it's like they are eliminating positions all across North Carolina that they assume is not needed. And so we are having some DEI offices And in North Carolina, they like to follow suit with Florida. So some of those offices are, they're not as strong as they could be. So when we start talking about like a thing like course releases or your work, your teaching loads and things of that sort, it's like you have to find ways in your course design where you are building in that time that you need to relax or to breathe or to do your research. And you have to be strategic with it. And understand that you still have to give your students your best self, or you have to give them what they pay, what they're paying for. You have to do the work, but you have to be strategic because, again, we are dealing with institutions and institutions with political, whole lot of politics. It's politics. I would love to say that all I have to do is teach. I would love to, but it's like I also have to learn how to navigate the political landscape, and it takes a lot. It just does. It just takes a lot. So it's not just teaching. So you're just I feel like you just have to find some way outside of when you go home, you shut your phone off. Does that make sense? Because I think the question was, was it about balance, or was it about having time? What was it?
I think it was more all of the above. Like, how do you sustain yourself in this kind of role when the likelihood when you do EDI work is that everyone taps you over and over again to do more of that work, right? And so how do you do it and stay committed to it without feeling totally depleted or deflated by all this work that you're doing and that nobody else needs to be? So you're absolutely right. Like, that is, you're answering that.
No. Yeah, and I think you have to build a community around yourself. You you cannot do things in isolation. You have to have support. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes when you go to your office and you close your door, sometimes you're going to have to build community. And if it's not in your department, it's going to have to be across the campus. And sometimes it might be at a campus, another campus. And so it's like you have to build a community around you, people who support you. I mean, I still reach out to people in Illinois, especially. I reach out to Angela. I will reach out to people who I know support me, support my work. And if it's nothing more than having someone who will listen to me rant and rave and talk about, oh my God, I hate it. And really, I just want to keep it, I'm sorry, I just like to keep things real and be like, it's not beautiful, it's not flowery, it's work. But you have to build a community around yourself in order to sustain you. Because sometimes you want to scream. Sometimes it's not that you have all the time and you know all the answers you want. But when you have a community around you that you can engage with and you can talk to and you can bounce those ideas off, sometimes that's what you need. I mean, because really it's like, especially as an assistant professor, I'm an assistant professor. I'm not a full professor, but I am on so many committees. And if I don't have people around me who will hold my hand, who will mentor me, who I can talk to, who I can bounce ideas off of, I don't know that I would be able to sustain myself. I don't know if it would be sustainable. So the first thing that I would say is build a community, reach out to people, stay in contact with some of the people that you are in your cohort now who can support you. Because if community is the thing that will sustain you, you need people.
Yeah. Oh, Sarah, do you want to go? Yes, to all of that. Yes. I also find that it's important to find people who can advocate for you because everybody says, say no to all of these things, say no to being on extra committees, all of those things, right? But how do you say it? And nobody tells you how to say it. But if there's somebody who can support you and advocate for you when you say no, or someone who can help you how to frame that no, and support you along the way, I found that really important. Although sometimes the problem is that when I say no, I feel like somebody else is gonna have to do that. And so the same stuff is gonna continue to be reinforced again. But if there's a team of people who can organize themselves around all of that, it helps a little bit, but yeah, it's really hard.
I'd like to just jump onto what Cristina and Flo just said. I think that's in a perfect world, you could say no, but a lot of us work places where if we say no, the person who's going to do it is going to make something really terrible happen or reinforce problems that already exist. So saying no is hard. Also, some people work places where there's no one else to do it. So one thing, and there's not always people that you can ask to support you and take over, right? So what do you do then? And I'm not saying I have the answers because I think I'm struggling with this, but maybe at least sometimes being strategic about, all right, of these 5 things, which 3 are going to make the most impact? And it's hard to let the other 2 go, but trying to draw some sort of boundaries around what you can and can't do. It's just a thought.
So we have one more question for you all that the committee has planned before we open up to Q&A for everyone, including those who have written their questions in the chat and or if people want to just turn their mics on and speak. But so the final question for you all is, what do you wish you had known as a graduate student that would have helped prepare you for the work that you're doing now? Kind of a big question, but again, in thinking about your role here as a former graduate student here at ISU and what you're doing now in totally new institutions with different politics, different kinds of contexts, different structures to have to navigate. So, to the rest of the students here, again, what would your advice be? What do you wish you had done more of or learned more about or any of that?
That's a difficult question.
I didn't say it was easy.
Well, I also just share one insight. I wish I knew that I would have full control in how I design my class. I don't have to teach a class absolutely like someone else designed it in the department, right? And so like I struggle, like at least initial design process of my classes, for example, when I tried to find materials, all these kind of things to match the course description they prepared for me. And then I realized one day, I am the boss of the things here for my class. I can teach whatever I want. I can teach whatever I can. I want to. So that gives me kind of agency, some kind of further confidence in myself. I mean, it's not like I have missed that insight totally at ISU because I taught so many writing classes in there. I used my own materials. I incorporated my expertise in that. But when I started my job here, I thought, okay, this is a new institutional context. I have to teach the way they prepared these things. But the point is, as faculty, we have the kind of opportunity to make changes. We can even entirely modify the class or even delete the class and introduce a new one. So I didn't realize the level of freedom I have in making those kinds of changes. So I think I'll stop just there.
That's interesting because I feel like for me it was the opposite. I thought that I was more constrained. Well, depending on what, if we're talking about teaching, designing a class, I found that I was seeing many more restrictions around what I wanted to do, systematically and like navigating hierarchies, departments, programs, all of those things was not obvious. And it's something that I had to teach myself to figure out how to do. So yeah, I just wanted, for me, it was the opposite, Mijan. So
Yeah, then
it's
it's a
good.
different context makes the difference. Yeah.
So is there something that I think to kind of piggyback on that, Cristina, is there something that would have helped you like experience here at ISU for that your particular situation, or is it something that you just couldn't have known until you had gotten there?
I think a combination of both. Like there's no way for people to know about the dynamics of the new place unless you are in that place, right? Or all the things that happen in the background and so on. But I guess that maybe in the job market, something really tangible in the job market sessions that you all do to help students do campus visits and all of those things, maybe there's something in those kinds of workshops that people can think about for when they go and then they they have to navigate the new places. I'm not sure. What do Sarah and Flo and Mijan think? Or anybody else?
I think I was prepared for the idea that departments can have both good or bad dynamics, right? And that, some just from people who graduated before me, like our network, right? Like, ooh, I work at this place, this is great. Oh, I work at this place, some of this stuff is awful. So I don't know, I guess I agree with Cristina. I don't know that you could fully sort of lay out all the different sort of things, but maybe like in those workshops, like kind of explicit conversations about the power struggles that happen in departments, that's real, like being realistic, like you may not have problems, but also some of this stuff that we've been talking about, how context really shapes the kind of work you actually do. If you're the one, like Angela and I know, right, the one tech writer at the liberal arts school, right? Their job is very different, right? Than if you're at a school with multiple people. Maybe just some, again, I don't remember that being part of something I learned. Not that my mentors didn't talk about it, but I don't think I learned it in those workshops, right? Like about how the context of your and shape of your university really changes your job as a whole, maybe.
I think it's one thing that I'm learning, or I have learned. I'll say today, I mean, I just got off right before I got on this call, on this Zoom. I just got off another Zoom because I'm the chair of the search committee for the writing instruction. So one of the things that I think that it is important that graduate students understand, especially when you're going into an institution, that yes, all these institutions are different. They are different in certain ways. And then some, you definitely have to learn the hierarchy, and that there is a hierarchy in most institutions. I would say when you get to an institution, before you start and you want to just run like you are, I don't know, like you are, who's the fastest, the runner now that's supposed to be so fast? I don't know. But before you just take off like a sprinter, you pay attention and look and listen, and you actually observe before you take off, because most of the time your first year they will give you like a course reduction, and they're trying to mentor you and all of this, and it's a lot going on, but be observant and don't just don't take off like a sprinter. And you said something about learning to say no. You find your allies in the people who can help you with saying no. Like Cristina said, it's like you really do need that support system in order to say no in certain cases, especially if you're an assistant professor and you are the only one in your department. They are probably tired. The associate professors, the full professors, they're tired and they're looking at you and they're like, okay, it's your turn. I've done mine. I'm done. I'm done. And they are done. And they will look to you to do a whole lot of stuff. Go hide somewhere. Do your class and get off campus real quick. I'm telling you, I'm just being real. And so so there, in some ways, I wish I had, I wish I did that. And it's like people see you and they're, oh, you're so smart, and they want you to do this stuff. But it's like sometimes you need to kind of go left and just sprint and be observant sometimes. Yeah, and so I should have learned that, and I'll go back and I'll say again, Angela told me to say no, but it's like you learn, you live and you learn, and there's some ways in which you have to get to that institution in order to learn the landscape and learn the people. And now I think I had an advantage because this was an institution that I taught at before. But I will say this, being an adjunct at an institution and being an assistant professor at an institution that's totally different. It's not the same. So if you were an adjunct and now you're an assistant professor, you have more responsibilities. There's more work. You have more things that you have to do. And yeah, so I wish for those who are going into the profession or who are going into the field, I would say, stop, look, and listen, and be observant, and find your allies, find your community. And yeah, that's the advice that I would give.
Really great advice. From all of you. So I'd like to focus the rest of our time, we've got about 20 minutes, to the questions that were raised in the chat. One of them was specific equity and diversity activities in the classroom that you do as teachers. Could you give us some examples?
Yeah, so that's a good question, but now I'm thinking about what I do. It's difficult to come up with the specific points, but like, I have to ask the question, is it an activity that is promoting an understanding of diversity, equity, or is it an activity that has a philosophical principle behind it that promotes like equal access to all participants? So I know the question here, I saw the what's in a name activity. I require students to do a mini investigation into what their names mean. And once they realize that their names come from so many different languages, they know that they're linguistically diverse already in so many ways. Because how many people have just English name? All of our names are coming from all different languages, cultures, civilizations, even. So, but one activity that I would like to share here possibly would be useful if our graduate students talk about pedagogy in new context, is that if you have assigned a project in class, have the students work on them inside the class. The students have full-time jobs. They have other responsibilities. They have so many things to do beyond the classroom setting. So a classroom space cannot be just a place for hanging around or just discussing the reading. Say if it is a writing assignment, I engage the students in actually doing that inside the class. It saves their time. It makes the classroom time a bit more meaningful to them, because you may not realize that a certain student has come to that class after 2 hours of driving on the freeway, or some student may have left some critical work in their workplace or when at home to attend that class. So every moment they are in the classroom has to be a meaningful, useful, or not every moment, but at least in general, the classroom time has to be spent on things that are useful, that are working towards the fulfilling the class requirements. So I split my assignments in multiple steps, and we engage in those activities inside the class. So this way I find students more engaged, interested in the activity that we do. Because again, I'm being mindful of the fact that the moment they get out of the classroom, their life circumstances vary so much that, okay, already like the social inequity is coming into play in that scenario. So one way to battle that is to get the work done in the classroom setting.
I'm going to go ahead and read the other question also, in case some of you all would rather respond to that too. So the one we just mentioned was about specific EDI activities in the classroom, so examples of that. Another really great question is, what kinds of pushbacks or challenges have you faced in your new institutional context, and how did you navigate those situations? Have your positionalities and embodied identities elicited any intersectional oppression in your DEI work? So I think that's a great question too, that some of you all might want to answer.
I can share something. In terms of the activities, I just don't think that there's one activity that I do that does the work, right? Like a check mark. I think of it as like, here's a whole course. How can I make it the most accessible and meaningful to anyone who's in this class? Obviously, it'll be imperfect, and they will tell me about what's not working for them, and then I'll have to change that for the next class and so on. But something that I found meaningful in the work that the students have done is in my undergrad class that used to be about the English language, and it used to be about grammar, syntax, morphology, and all of those things, right? Having more options for embodied language learning and experiences, and material language learning as well. So having students talk about community walks or community community work that they do, and walks, actually like being in a community and just relying on those knowledges to define what it's like for them to be in relationship to English and other languages. And part of that also is something that I want to expand on is doing an Indigenous walking tour that we have at UW with the students in my class, and thinking about what the impact of English is like once we do that walk. So those are some things that I can think about in terms of doing activities related to DEI work.
I guess I have to agree definitely with Cristina as far as the creation of the creation of the whole. maybe not just necessarily just one individual class. I think that sometimes too, though, we forget when we have students who are coming in to our classrooms, especially if you are dealing with historically marginalized communities, or you're dealing with students who have been exposed to materials or to learning environments that it's not it was never designed for them to succeed in, or they will have never read books or had activities that were a part of their lived experience, where they might have read To Kill a Mockingbird, wonderful, but they've never read Native Son. And so it's so some of the work that we do is introducing them to writers and artists who are who they can relate to, and I would probably say that that's a part of the work, because that opens them up to a different outlook, a different vision. I'm teaching Black speculative fiction now, and it's interesting how when you ask them to engage in discussions, that they are like, oh my God, so I didn't know this, or I've never read this, or, and I think that educators should do a better job in diversifying the curriculum so that it's not so one-sided. But that's another topic. In my tech comm class, introducing activities, to be specific, that I started at ISU, where it's like we're looking at how products have been gendered, and how the people design based on demographics and things of that sort. So, and then talking to my students who are in computer science, as they are looking at the different avatars and saying, okay, well, who is not being represented and why? And so making them question those things is a part of, I would say, is a part of the work. But that's not necessarily just in one assignment or in one course, especially if that's a part of who you are. You build that into all of the, I would say all that you do, but it becomes a part of you. So what I'm seeing is that most of the work that the assignments that I have created, they have some component where it asks students to engage and to think outside of the box, and to think about who's represented and why. And if they're not being represented, then who benefits from that? What are some of the political, the social implications of representation? I think that's extremely important, especially in our course design, and as we help our students to navigate the academy.
I will just echo what Flo said about readings and activities that highlight the validity of various, cultural knowledges and experiences, right? And that some students have literally just never been exposed to the idea that cultural we forget, I think. Yes, I think that was a good thing you said, Flo. Like, we, with our PhDs, right, we forget that even that is just a huge, can be at least a huge piece of doing the work, right? Saying, yes, there are, in fact, in my case, right, there are, in fact, Chicana Rarishans out here in the world, and they write this stuff. And you can read that. And they've written about cultural practices that you can relate to. And we can have assignments in our class where you can bring your local contextual, cultural, embodied, lived experience knowledge in, and that's valid and relevant and important. You know, I think that's, yeah.
So yeah, I agree with these ideas of incorporating materials, works that attest to this kind of things, right? Yes, because I feel free to incorporate any materials that I think reflects whatever I'm trying to do. So that's one of my practices as well, that I incorporate materials intentionally. And because I focus on linguistic justice, linguistic diversity, earlier I used to hide myself behind kind of a screen curtain that, okay, I'm speaking the mainstream American English. And I used to do that early years as a graduate student at ISU as well. But then I changed. In fact, the moment I changed my approach to linguistic diversity, I claimed my identity. I bring myself at the forefront of academic discussions. How I am linguistically diverse, how I have gone through all those kind of things. This kind of personal resonance actually makes meaningful pointers for students. And in fact, my teaching evaluation has changed drastically. This is because of just one approach at ISU even. So if I compare my teaching evaluations from previous classes with the classes where I have explicitly talked about this kind of things, so it makes more meanings in that context, really. But also to answer to the question of pushback, I think the pushback comes from some of your colleagues sometimes who think if I'm accommodating the students' individual circumstances too much, maybe I'm sacrificing the educational quality. So which is a doubt that they cast on the equity initiatives. And we have to push back on that as well. Like flexible attendance policy or flexible due dates or meeting students outside the classroom. I know it's a lot of work, it requires time. We do that, but some people think that yeah, we should not be accommodating this much. They're supposed to come to class, right? They are supposed to do all the work. So why bother? All these kind of things. I think we're sacrificing our educational quality. So I have found that like those kind of comments coming from some of the colleagues, not all, but again, in our institutional context, we kind of created a platform where we have found the effectiveness of that process that we have taken. So it's more acceptable here. But the pushback sometimes also comes from myself, because of the self-care need, because of many other things that I go through. So, but other than that, the pushback, I would say, is more of a lack of resource sometimes. In my equity-focused writing instruction design pilot, like, okay, there is a Center for Academic Access, it's a writing center kind of thing. They said they will reach out to the students who disappeared from classes after first 4 weeks. I reported them, okay, tell them that these students are missing from classes, right? So I provided my data, they didn't get back to me. So I don't know what happened to those. So I had to work more. In fact, in one class, I collected the student's personal phone number. Like and then when they started like missing classes, I actually texted them to see what's going on. And really, I mean, life-altering circumstances happen in people's lives. So you don't know that unless you reach out to the students. Otherwise, you feel like this is just a demotivated student. This is not the case. So yeah, those are the things I experienced. Like the institutional support is necessary. Our university institutions often engage in the discourses of DEI, but I heard one faculty member in a Senate meeting in here saying, "Go find the money. Find what the university spends the money." So if they are talking about diversity initiatives, how much money they're spending on that. So I think there is a lot of institutional lip service to the discourses. So that's like, yeah, lack of cooperation, or they're not engaging like a full scale or I mean, they're not engaging all their resources to achieve this kind of initiatives, or they're just, putting it on the faculty, like you do all this kind of work, and then you attend all these workshops and do all our other things.
I'm
Yes.
just going to jump in here and say to graduate students, you are not going to change everyone at your institution when you get there. And there are going to be jerks who do say things like, oh, but they should show up on time. Well, that's about them and not about you. That says way more about their issues with power and the power they want to maintain over others. And their motivation has nothing to do with students. So I want you, like, that learning not to let people like that grind you too much is part of this work too, right? That recognize it for what it is. Say, all right.
Yes,
I'd
so
be
true,
interested.
Sarah. Excellent, excellent thing to point out. Well, we have just a couple of minutes left, so thank you all so much for coming here today and listening to our fantastic alumni. Thank you especially, and a big round of applause for Dr. Mijan Rahman, Dr. Flourice Richardson, Dr. Cristina Sanchez-Martin, and Dr. Sarah Warren Riley for taking time out of their busy days and schedules to speak with us today. So thank you so much. Any kind of final thoughts? I think we have like about a minute left, and I'm going to take a screenshot of this real quick since I have been asked to do so.
Good job, everybody.
Thank you, Jerry. So nice to see you.
Nice to see everyone.
Thank you all. It was so great seeing you all. And I'm sorry, Jerry. I thought that you were done. Sorry for interrupting.
It's good to meet Jerry in here. I have read about you, heard about you in Dr. Hass's class, and I see you today.
Thanks
All
for
right.
having us.
Thank you all so much.
Sarah, thank you, Flo, Mijan, thank